Are you messed up and you don't even know it? Well, stay tuned to meet a man whose life was messed up, and now he helps others to find their way. My name is Yvonne Lewis, and you're watching Urban Report. Welcome to Urban Report. My guest today is Dr. Ira Lake, one of the nation's leaders in traumatic childhood recovery and a victim himself of childhood trauma. He's an author, counselor, and a Seventh-day Adventist minister. Welcome to Urban Report, Dr. Lake.
Thank you so much.
It's so good to have you. May I call you Dr. Ira?
You can call me Ira.
Dr. Ira, I could call you Dr. Ira, and then that way I'm acknowledging your title, and it's not as formal, right?
All right.
So you have written a book, and let's hold the book up, and we'll put it up there on the screen too. Messed Up and Don't Even Know It. The Journey from Childhood Trauma to Healing. What led you to write this book?
Well, as a counselor, I've been running into a lot of people, couples, individuals who, when we got down to helping them, we could trace it back to their childhood and the things they experienced. And I realized that I myself was a victim of childhood trauma. And I wanted to help people understand that they are not alone, that the help could be given, and that they could overcome it and find healing.
That is such an important factor, to know that you're not alone. You're going through something, and there's someone else that can help you through, give you the tools that you need to come through it. Let's find out a little bit about your childhood. What kind of traumatic episodes did you have to deal with growing up? Well,
first, I was raised in a Christian home, Seventh-day Adventist Christian home. It was quite common for me to be awakened in the middle of the night with arguments between my parents, or seeing violent acts perpetrated by my parents on each other. And then as I got older, after my mother and father divorced, my mother basically tortured me. She took out her frustration, her abuse, her childhood stuff. It came out on me.
So she literally tortured you?
That's the word I'm using.
What would she do?
Well, if she thought I was not telling the truth, she would take a hot knife or put a butter knife on the stove and heat it, and then she would put it on my tongue. She'd pick up anything within reach, and she would hit me with it, or slam me against a wall, or make me undress, and I would be paraded throughout the house naked in front of my siblings or whoever was in the house. Stitches in my head. I was so ashamed as a boy growing up, and as a young man, when I played sports, I didn't want to even go into the locker room to change because of all the scars on my arms and back and legs, and I called it torture.
Wow. And where was your dad? Where was your father in all of this? After they divorced, did you still have a relationship with him?
Actually, my father got custody of us. That was unheard of in the 60s, unheard of. He got custody, and then we saw my mother on the weekends.
He knew about the torture?
You know, I like to think he knew, but he never said anything. I mean, how can you go to school with scars or with bruises and not noticed? So, yeah, I thought he knew, and I was mad at him for a while because he never stood up and protected me. And I learned from an early age, and most childhood trauma victims learn early on, that there is no help. You're going to be by yourself. You're going to be isolated. And that's a misconception, because there is help. All I had to do was talk to somebody, a teacher. I was presenting a program recently, and my first grade teacher came to me and she said to me, as well as with another lady who was there, she said, "We knew what was going on in your home." They were church members in the church, but we just didn't know what to do.
Oh my goodness.
And this happens quite frequently, and it happens more and more, and we are just now starting to talk about it in the church.
So there were people who knew that you were being abused, but there was nothing done to protect you. And I guess because they went to church with your mom to have been a part of removing you from that home, they didn't want, maybe they didn't want to deal with that. I don't know. I mean, but that sounds like you must have felt so vulnerable and just unprotected.
Who do you trust? Who do you tell? And if you did tell, would they do something about it? When people, and we don't really talk about it because we don't really want to be associated with this kind of behavior in our churches. We talk so much about the spiritual, and we try to put on these fronts that we are great, but we are kind of, we can be beasts, so cruel.
And this is part of the whole, this is a sin problem versus a denominational issue. This is a sin issue because it transcends denomination.
Correct.
You know, we know that it's in every denomination, unfortunately, because it's a sin problem and a mental health issue. So here you were as a child coming up in that environment, your parents divorce, and you go with your dad. What was life like with your dad?
Babysitter to babysitter. My dad was a full-time teacher in the Chicago public school system. And then at night, he worked full-time at the main post office in Chicago. So he worked 16 hours a day, 44 plus years on each of the jobs. He wasn't around. He had to provide for us. My dad was a great guy. I love him. I modeled myself after him. He was my role model, but he abandoned me. He never stood up. And I know he was trying to provide, but
so essentially, you lost your mom because your parents divorced and she had been physically abusive to you, and you also didn't have your dad there. And how many siblings did you have?
I have 5 siblings, 2 older, 2 younger. I'm right in the middle.
Okay, and were they caring for you? Did you have any support? Were they also abused by your mom?
They were also being abused as well. My younger sister, she would, as we would come home, and there would be this feeling in your stomach like something was going to happen, butterflies, upset stomach, and as soon as we would get into the house, she would just break out and start crying, just uncontrollable fits of crying because we were all scared. We didn't know who was going to show up in the form of my mother, where she could be so funny and gregarious, and then she could be a monster.
And you didn't know who was going to open that door?
Open the door, you walk in, and you go, okay, which way do we have today?
Wow. It's so appalling that so many of our children, many more than we care to acknowledge, so many are going through something like that, where there is abuse in the home, and what do you do? And we're going to come to that in a bit. What do you do if you see that there is abuse in the home? Because you and your siblings were just so vulnerable, and there was nobody there. And your dad was working, he was trying to provide, but he was working, so you had no one, no adult really to plug into for emotional nurturing. So how did that affect your relationships later on in life?
Well, I can talk about it now after the fact, but I didn't know it then. I am by nature a very distrustful person. I am wary of people. And yet, when you see me interact with me, I'm outgoing, I like to laugh, but I'm naturally wary of people because I don't know if you're going to hurt me. So I grew up through life with my guard up, emotionally walled off, didn't want you to get in too close, because if you did, you had the potential to hurt me. So I just do like everybody else. I try to suppress what I was feeling, and I kept myself busy. So busy so that I didn't have time to think about it. And I didn't want to be alone because the silence would just get at me. So I stayed busy. And that's how I survived my teenage years until I went off to college. And when I went to Oakwood College at 17, that was liberation. Oh my goodness, I could eat what I wanted, I could go where I wanted, and I was like, this was heaven.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. How did your upbringing impact your relationship with your peers? Were you outgoing as a teenager, or did you become more outgoing later?
Well, I was outgoing as a teenager. People like to be around me. I'm always laughing and having fun, but they never knew what was going on inside, and that's the way I kept it. And so people were attracted to me. In high school, I played a lot of sports, captains of a lot of the teams. I had my own choir in high school, and we would travel all over to the various churches, and people thought that I was this ideal guy, and I wanted to be like Ira. They didn't know that I was like, man, this is hell. I can't wait to get older. I'm getting out of here, because nobody's going to protect me. I got to protect myself.
Yeah.
And when I went to college, I went home one time after that, and that was only for a couple of days. I never came home again.
My, that must have been so lonely.
Oh, it was, but guess what? I could protect myself.
Yes, yes, yes. So is that what, and in retrospect, is that, you think, what led you to become this helper of other people who have gone through similar circumstances in life? Do you think that that's what led you to want to do it, or were you feeling just kind of this concern and empathy for people? What do you think led you into the work that you're doing? And let's talk about the work that you do.
Well, I believe from a clinical point of view that children learn empathy and concern from others in their childhoods. Now, whether I learned it there or then, I don't know. All I know is I've had this desire all of my life to want to help people. My first choice in life was not to be a pastor, it was to be a social worker. And that's all I talked about. High school, I'm going to help people. And it wasn't for a particular thing, but I just wanted to help people, just be in a position to kind of provide resources and things for them. But as I got to my junior year in high school, I felt God calling me to ministry. So I didn't put the social work on the back burner. I went to Oakwood and did a double major in both. My father said, hey, listen, you may not get called to ministry, so you got to have a backup plan. And actually, when I left Oakwood, I didn't get a call to ministry right away. I was a social worker in Arizona for about 4 years before God opened up the door for me to go into full-time pastoral ministry.
So you have that dual concentration of theology and psychology, really. Yes. Which is tremendous, because you can help give spiritual tools, and you can help, with the psychological things too. So that is really, what a blessing, what a blessing. So you got married after college. How did your past affect your marriage?
It was rough and tough for me to let her in, because first of all, my in-laws, my ex-in-laws, they didn't like me, they didn't trust me, and so right away my guard was up. And I remember being married, and my wife would go off, my then wife would go out to be with her family, and I had to stay by myself. I was not allowed to socialize and be around them. So I went through most of my then marriage with my guard up, because I knew her family didn't like me. It was just a matter of time, and they were always whispering in her ear. And it could have been my perception that they were always tearing me down. And so I just either absorbed myself in my work, and I did not allow her to get close to me.
The inability to really attach, that just kind of generalized into all of your close relationships? You just never got too close? You never let anybody get too close?
All of them. And I didn't learn this until I sat on a counselor's chair for about 7 years. And I realized that I had inadvertently been sabotaging every relationship I'd been in. As soon as they got close to me, I'd make up some reason why we shouldn't be together or why I shouldn't be your friend. And that's what trauma does to you. It distorts your perception of people, of events, of things. You think that people are, every person could be a potential threat to you. Every glance, every look, every misconception that you take on a word, you take it and you go, man, they're trying to hurt me. And so you go through life scared to open up, scared to talk, scared to get close to somebody because they are potential threats to you.
And it's understandable that would be the reaction. It's a kind of a normal coping strategy.
Yes.
Because when you open up, you get hurt.
Yes.
So it's a defense mechanism that you want to just keep people at bay because you could really hurt me.
Yes.
And so you learned this when you went into counseling yourself. Let's talk a bit about trauma and how it manifests. I just wrote an article recently for the 3ABN World magazine about PTSD and how it's affecting our inner city children more than we realize. We think of soldiers and veterans with PTSD, but it sounds to me like, you know, what you had was a mild or, you know, I don't know, you tell me, form of that, because the inability to trust, the fear, you know, flashbacks, things that happen, these are so common in the inner city. 30%, it's speculated that 30% of inner city adolescents have either mild to severe PTSD, and nobody's treating it. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on to talk about trauma and its effects on children and adults later in their relationships. So with you, when you began to treat people that had had similar traumas, did a bell kind of ring in your head like, wait a minute, you're reacting this way to this situation, and I kind of did that too. Did you react that way? How did you react?
I'm so glad you said that. You know, I'm sitting there, I'm working with a client or a couple, and they would tell me things, and it would sound so much like what I had experienced, and yet I never took it for myself. I was great at helping other people, but when it came to myself, please, I'm okay.
So you weren't seeing it?
No. It wasn't until toward the end when I'm working with a couple. Both of them had been through some very abusive relationships in the past. They're sitting there, and the guy is actually telling my story. And I said to myself, "Oh my God, man, I'm messed up." That's what I said to myself. I'm trying to help them, but I'm saying, "Oh man, are you crazy?" And I said, man, I've got to get some help because, man, I'm not sleeping, I'm stress eating, I'm not letting anybody get close to me, I'm unhappy, I'm perpetually unhappy, and that's not who I am. And I met a wonderful lady, 67 years old, white lady. She broke me down in about 4 sessions. And she said to me, I'm fast forwarding at the end, after about 7 years, she says, "You're ready." You're ready.
Wow.
And sitting there, I said, now I know what God wants me to do. He called me to ministry, but it didn't, first of all, necessarily mean it had to be paid ministry. So I'm in ministry when I was a social worker. Then I got into pastoral ministry, and most of my ministry then was I was working with couples and clients. I realized that God had given me a gift of discernment and wisdom that I could use in the counseling. And I was doing more counseling than I was doing preaching. And a friend of mine said, man, you're gifted in this area. You should expand it and work on it. And I went back to school and I began, and I saw something, and I'm going to go back to your point. When we talk about trauma, we have to also talk about community violence. That's a part of the trauma.
Absolutely.
Our inner cities, the drugs, the violence, the gangs, the shooting, we see it. We become insensitive to it, but it affects us. And I make a statement, I believe that unresolved trauma, childhood trauma, can come back and it will plague every facet of your life, professionally, your relationships. If you don't deal with it, it'll just keep showing up again and again. So you asked me, you said, well, how can you tell if a person's been traumatized? They like to isolate. They have problems keeping relationships. They are irritable, moody. Most of them are depressed. Their productivity, even on their jobs, it's bad to poor. They're always getting in trouble. Those are telltale signs, and I'm not going through all of them, but just enough to let you know, hey, look, this is something's going on here. It's wrong, and this person needs help.
That's great information, because people need to be able to identify the symptoms and perhaps see if they have that, if they've been traumatized and just didn't even realize it. Messed up and you don't even know it, right? So what are some of the tools, like, if there were any, besides, of course, going to a counselor and getting help, of course, and I think that's important, but what are some things that you can do just with yourself to kind of help you to cope with that?
Some of the things that a person can do would be journaling. It allows you, it relaxes the body and allows some of the negative emotions to come out, and you can put it on paper. But it also helps you to see that maybe the situation is not so bad. Most of us are visual learners. If we can see it on paper, we go, wow, okay, it's bad, but it's not as bad as I'm thinking. Aerobic exercise is another way to just allow the body to relax. It gets out a lot of that pent-up negative emotion. A lot of water.
What is the role of water? That's a really good point.
Flushes the system.
All right.
It cleans out a lot of that. I know it sounds funny, but it really cleans out a lot of the negativity.
Okay.
It just flushes it out the body. You sweat it out.
So water.
Yes.
Water. And exercise, because of the endorphins that are generated, the body's own pleasure chemicals, so to speak. So that's really important. And journaling.
Yes.
Would you say that if a person has been through trauma, they perceive life differently? How? How does that happen?
Again, when you are traumatized, it throws off your perception. You see life like this. Everything is distorted. So every glance could hold potential for harm. Something you said to me, as innocent as it is, I can take it the wrong way because of that distortion, and I see that as a threat, or I am so super sensitive. You can't tell me things. You can't even give me constructive criticism because I'm so sensitive that I'm going to take it like you're attacking me. So a person can grow up and through life and see life through that distorted lens, and that's not really reality. And one of my jobs as a therapist is to help them to straighten up the distortion and see that, no, it's not as bad as you think. It's really, you can handle this. You can get through this.
Yes.
We do it by helping them tell their story. It's painful, but they tell their narrative in such a way, in a supportive, nurturing environment, and each step along the way of the story, I show them things. Hey, look, okay, look at this, see? They go, wow, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Or it was bad, but here's what you can do to make it better.
Wow. So would you say that people that come, well, let me go back. There is a misconception in the Black community really about counseling.
Oh, man.
Tell us your experience with that.
You know, you are so spot on. You know, historically speaking, African Americans have had a number done on them in the medical field, and that includes everything. So somebody has told us that going to get help, be it at a medical doctor or even a therapist or counselor, you shouldn't do it because they're going to brainwash you. And so people grow up through life in our culture, and they don't want to go to counseling. They don't want to go to a therapist. They don't even want to see a doctor until it's almost too late. And let's blow that out of the water. I know God can do a miracle. He can just straight out heal you. But he also gives other people gifts and talents, and he can use them to bring your healing.
Absolutely.
I found my healing in a counseling chair.
Yes, because the Lord worked through
Yes.
that situation to heal you.
Yes.
Wow. Briefly, give us an example of someone that came to you with an issue, and it's going to have to be really brief, and what happened? Like 1 minute.
I'm actually working with a soldier who just came back from Afghanistan. He has been experiencing violent episodes, night sweats, loss of appetite. And in 2 sessions, we have just relaxed him and taught him how to relax himself. His wife was so impressed, she came to the last counseling session and said, "Can you help me too?" He's ongoing work, but breakthroughs can happen immediately.
Yes, that's tremendous. And how do you integrate the spiritual with the psychological?
First of all, when you come to me, I tell them I'm an ordained, trained pastor, but I'm also a graduate, clinically trained therapist. I will use biblical terms at times, but I'm not here to convert you. I'm here to help you, and I might pray with you. But I want you to know that I have your best interests at heart, and if you would allow me to work with you, I'll make sure you'll be okay.
Wow, that's tremendous. I thank you so much for being with us. You have been such a blessing. You've given some great information and some great tools that I know that you can use by the grace of God. There are many among us who feel disconnected and detached. If you're feeling that way, get help. Contact Dr. Lake or another qualified mental health professional to give you the tools that you need to move forward. Remember, God works through supernatural means as well as through his servants to heal and restore. Well, we've reached the end of another program. I can't believe our time is up. Join us next time, because you know what? It just wouldn't be the same without you.